Pacific start. So we're back here on NFL Live, and while free agency was a blitz at the outset, as it always is, there's a remarkable amount of talent still available to sign. So for the latest on the names we need to know about, we go back to Shefty in Palm Beach. Shefty, what are you hearing in terms of some of these big free agents, starting with Bobby Wagner?
Well, Phil, Bobby's got some interest in him. He visited with the Baltimore Ravens on Friday, a couple of days after he visited with the Los Angeles Rams. There are two teams right there that are interested. I think there are other teams as well that have reached out to him to gauge his interest in coming to play for them. I think he's waiting for the right opportunity, the right fit, the right offer, all those things together. But the Rams and the Ravens right now seem to be square in the mix for Bobby Wagner, the former Seahawks linebacker. As for the Chiefs safety, Tyrann Mathieu, he still is out there as a free agent. Remember, he left Houston to go to Kansas City, the same path that Justin Reed followed, going from Houston to Kansas City, displacing the Honey Badger, leaving him as a free agent. Doesn't sound like he's in a rush. He's waiting for the right opportunity, the right fit, like Bobby Wagner. And as you mentioned, Field, there are some notable free agents out there right now. Stephon Gilmore also out there. Odell Beckham Jr. also out there. So some quality free agents a few weeks after free agency began, and we'll see where they find homes soon enough.
Shefty, great stuff, and I'm sure your Twitter will continue to be very active as those guys find their new homes. We'll talk to Shefty again a little bit later on in the show. Let's go to Mina here for a second. And Mina, Tyrann Mathieu, a player who is incredibly versatile. We know the skill set he brings. What might be an ideal landing spot or two for him in his next chapter of his football career?
Yeah, well, it kind of depends on what matters to him in terms of playing for a contender or maximizing his earnings. If it's a contender, he wants to play for a team that I have in mind is the Indianapolis Colts. Now, they already have a couple of solid safeties in Kari Willis and Julian Blackmon, who was injured for a lot of last season. But as you mentioned, Tyrann Mathieu is not a traditional safety. He is a chess piece. Not only will he allow them to play more dime, but he allows Gus Bradley, new defensive coordinator, to do more interesting things on defense, use him a variety of ways. So I'd love to see that fit. A rebuilding team that I think could use him, which is somewhat ironic because they sent away Justin Reed to Kansas City, would be the Houston Texans. This is a rebuilding organization, so Mathieu would, have to be not concerned with playing on a contender. But rebuilding teams need leaders. They need experienced veterans who can help the core, build that young core, and he would, in my mind, would be the perfect fit in that regard.
Interesting stuff there. I like that idea. I hadn't really thought about a return to Houston for someone like Tyrann Mathieu.
Indy's the interesting one for me.
Okay.
Because twofold. They've got the money still to give him a contract worthy. I think the question for me, Mina, would be, does he want to play in predominantly cover three? Does he want to be that safety that is down in the box more often than not, rather than kind of roaming in coverage?
Well,
Colts fans will remind you they have a lot of money.
Yeah, they do have a lot of money. And I think, Dan, that's a really good point. Obviously, with Bradley coming in, I think there'd have to be some evolution of his scheme, frankly, to use Mathieu and optimize him. But we've seen coaches like Dan Quinn go away from cover three and evolve their scheme. So I would be curious to see if Gus is willing to do that as well.
Will be interesting to see where Mathieu ends up. In the meantime, Dan, how about a thought about Bobby Wagner? Is there a team that makes sense for him? We're talking about one of the best, not just players, but leaders in the NFL.
Yeah, it's L.A., but it's not the Rams. I think it's the Chargers. We've watched this Charger team over the past month go all in. Mina's a fan. They still have money to spend that they can, again, compensate Bobby Wagner for the type of value that he brings. And, we've talked about the Chargers defensively a lot since the season and through the offseason. And the main weakness was not only stopping the run, but really stopping the run on the interior of their defense. And they've fixed that with some of the free agent additions. But you're talking about a Bobby Wagner linebacker that thrives at stopping the run in the middle. And I think if you're the Chargers and you're going, how do we really solidify this with also knowing that the draft is a month away? You put him in the middle of that linebacking group, and you're feeling really good about your ability to stop the run.
And that will be the icing on the cake for what's been a really busy offseason for them so far. Let's play a little game of read and react, shall we? And you may have heard that Mac Jones, not quite sure who's going to be his play caller or coordinator this upcoming season. He goes into year two. Big year for him. Bill Belichick addressed the Patriots' offensive coaching staff, at least a little bit, earlier on today.
Yeah, I'm not big on titles, so we have jobs to do. We'll do the jobs. Obviously, that's important for all players to get coached well, and we plan on doing that. Everybody will have a defined role, like they always do. Again, the off-season's the off-season. Once we get to getting on the field, coaching the players and game planning and things like that, then that'll all work itself out.
Dan, no defined OC as of yet. How big of a deal is this for Mac Jones?
I think it's a huge deal. I mean, the Patriots are notorious for having positionless players. This sounds like positionless coaches in a way. For a young quarterback that's going into his second year that not only loses a coach, but now doesn't have that defined voice. And I think that's the most important thing for a young quarterback is that one defined voice that he hears on a consistent basis, on a daily basis of what you're trying to do. And I'd say the second thing is this. The Patriots don't have a coach on their offensive staff that has ever called plays in the NFL. That concerns me.
Will be really interesting to see how that shakes out. Let's head to Houston, where Davis Mills is currently set to be the starter. New head coach Lovie Smith talked about his expectations for the second-year quarterback. Here's what he said, and this is from our ESPN Texans reporter Sarah Barshop from his press conference earlier today. Lovie Smith praised quarterback Davis Mills, saying he got to see, quote, some of the best of what Davis could do last season. He's smart, can throw the ball, he's a better athlete than he's given credit for. We're excited about going forward with him. All right, so Mina, what do you make of Davis Mills?
I think that Lovie's comments make a ton of sense in terms of having him be the starting quarterback this year. Davis Mills clearly outperformed expectations last season. We were talking about the Patriots. Watch the Patriots game. I still kind of can't believe that happened. But, you know, he's also, despite outperforming expectations, not obviously the answer. But to me, this gives him the opportunity to evaluate him as a bridge quarterback and then focus on rebuilding so that if he's not the starting quarterback next year, they have the draft capital in place to pursue someone else and a roster that's in better condition.
And all of a sudden, Houston has a bunch of draft capital. Six-time Pro Bowl wide receiver Tyreek Hill to the Dolphins for five draft picks. The deal also makes Tyreek Hill the highest-paid wide receiver in NFL history. His now former head coach, Andy Reid, weighed in on the decision to trade away that speedy wideout.
We tried to sign. That's a sticky question because we did try to sign Tyreek at a certain cost. Once it gets past that, now you can see what we're doing here with the players we brought in, and we feel they're very good football players. So we'll see. I mean, the end result is going to be what takes place during the season, but Brett's building this thing back to where we feel comfortable so that we can go win on Sundays.
Love Andy Reid in Hawaiian shirts, but that's neither here nor there right now. Mina, let me ask you, you've had a couple of days to digest this Tyreek Hill trade. What do you make of it in terms of the Chiefs and their perspective in this deal?
Yeah. I feel like I'm kind of dressed like Andy Reid today, by the way. And listening to him, his words, I think, do explain the Chiefs' reasoning or the rationale behind a deal that a lot of, or a trade, rather, that a lot of people found puzzling at the time, specifically the focus on cost. And once we saw or what Miami gave Tyreek Hill, making him arguably the highest paid wide receiver in football. To me, this tells us a few things. The Chiefs, while understanding obviously the incredible value Hill brings to their team, how unique he is, obviously didn't believe he was worth that kind of contract with his age and his particular skill set as a wide receiver. I suspect they think it won't age particularly well. Another thing, this is a roster that has a lot of holes, especially on defense. And I think they saw an opportunity with the trade to address some of those holes, because if they gave Hill all of that money, this would be an even more top-heavy roster than it's been. And then the third thing, Phil, is something that's kind of occurred to me over the last couple of days. Patrick Mahomes is 26 years old. Right. This is not an Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady situation where you have to be all in now and maximize the roster in the present tense. Clearly, they're thinking long-term. They're trying to extend their Super Bowl window. Now, does it mean they might be slightly worse in the short term? It's entirely possible, but I can see why they made that bet.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point with the reality of the roster, Mina. And I think because of this trade, something to point out is they have 5 picks in the top 100 of this draft. They have 4 in the top 62. And if we look at some of the people on their team, you know, Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, Kareem Hunt, who was a Kansas City Chief, who's now a Cleveland Brown, Travis Kelce, those guys were all drafted in the second round or later. This organization has a history of building really good rosters, not just on the backs of first-round picks, but second- and third-round picks. Talked about this a little bit last week. I'd love to, like the philosophical change. I think that they became so dependent on the RPO. I think they're going more towards, rather than trying to get the perfect play call, getting better execution as an offense and not being so reliant on Patrick having to be perfect every play. And I think they're going to try to go run the ball a little bit more and play drop-back quarterback. And if you ask me, like, what would be the one piece that I think they need offensively, it's a Jahan Dotson from Penn State because I think they have some speed with Mecole Hardman and MVS at wide receiver. Juju has a bigger body.
Yeah.
I think Dotson would give them the route runner, the finesse type of receiver that if they're going to go to that offense, they probably need to implement into it.
You know, every trade that takes place in the NFL is probably best judged after a couple of seasons.
Sure.
This feels like the poster child for such discussion, right? Because we're not going to know how good this Chiefs package is until we see some of these 100%. Picks on the field. So it'll be really interesting to see how Kansas City uses its new assets. Dan, you mentioned the draft capital. They're the only team in the NFL that has multiple picks in each of the first four rounds of this year's draft.